Today, we're diving into a really sharp analysis of Meghalaya's state finances, and it asks a pretty heavy question. Is the state actually building a prosperous future, or is it just mortgaging it away? Let's break down the arguments. Right out of the gate, the analysis does not pull any punches. It opens with this, just an incredibly stark claim. This really sets the tone for a critical look at how the state's finances are being managed. It suggests that if a private company operated this way, its CEO would be in serious legal trouble. So what are they really getting at here?
Well, the whole case is built around this central and, let's be honest, very provocative idea. A Ponzi scheme. That's a term you usually hear in connection with financial fraud. So to apply it to how a government is run, that's a heavy charge. Let's dig into what the source actually means by this.
So to be super clear here, the analysis isn't talking about personal fraud or anything like that. It's using this term to describe a really dangerous financial cycle. It's when you have to keep borrowing new money, not to build things or to grow the economy, but just to make the interest payments on the money you've already borrowed. And by its very nature, a cycle like that just can't go on forever. Okay, so you have this really critical view on one side, but on the other, there's the official story, right? The government has been pushing this ambitious vision for Meghalaya's economy. Now, we're going to see how this analysis tries to deconstruct that public-facing slogan. And this slide just lays out the conflict, plain and simple. On one hand, you have the government's ambitious goal, a $10 billion economy. But on the other hand, this critique paints a very different picture. It calls the state a financial colony, meaning it's completely dependent on money from the outside. Here's the core of that argument. Look, when a government spends a lot of money, even if it's borrowed money, the GDP number does go up. But the analysis calls this a sugar high, It gives you a temporary burst of energy, things look good for a minute, but it's not real, sustainable growth. It's not the kind of growth that comes from a healthy, productive economy that's actually generating its own revenue. And this chart really gets to the heart of that dependency issue. According to the data presented here, for every single rupee the state spends, only about 20% of it comes from its own tax collections. The other 80%, that's transferred from the central government. This ratio is pretty much key to understanding the whole argument that the state's economy isn't standing on its own 2 feet. All right, so how does all this actually spiral into what the analysis calls a debt trap? Let's get into the nitty-gritty financial mechanisms that it claims are creating this really unsustainable situation. This is a really key concept they bring up, fungible borrowing. Think about it like this. Let's say you take out a business loan to build a new factory, something that will make you money in the long run. But instead of building the factory, you use that cash to pay your monthly rent and electricity bills. The allegation here is that this is essentially happening at the state level, that money borrowed for long-term projects is getting rerouted just to cover day-to-day running costs. And this is where it gets really scary, leading to what's called a dead weight debt cycle. Let's just walk through these 4 steps. 1, you take out loans for big projects. 2, those projects don't end up making enough money. Maybe they even lose money. So 3, the debt can't pay for itself. And that leads to the final critical step, number 4. You have to borrow new money just to pay the interest on the old money. You can see how that becomes a trap. Okay, so they're making some pretty big claims. How do they back it up? Well, the material lays out a series of 20 really pointed questions aimed at the government. They're basically framed as a demand for transparency, saying the public needs the answers to see the true financial picture. Let's look at a few of the big ones. First up, where's the safety net? Every state is supposed to have this emergency savings account. It's called a consolidated sinking fund to protect against defaulting on loans. But the big question being asked here is there actually enough money in that fund to provide any real security if a crisis hits? Is it a real safety net or just a token gesture? Then there's the whole issue of hidden debt. The analysis raises serious concerns about something called off-budget borrowings. What does that even mean? Basically, it's like having a second credit card that doesn't show up on your main statement. The debt is taken on by separate entities, so it might not appear in the main budget. And the crucial question is, just how much debt is being kept out of public view? And this next one is all about accountability, or maybe the lack of it. See, there's a law that's supposed to stop the state from borrowing too much, but the analysis points out that this law keeps getting changed. So instead of controlling spending to stay within the legal limit, it seems the goalposts are just moved every time to allow for even more borrowing. And this all circles back to that bombshell Ponzi scheme accusation. The source says the proof is in a specific number called the primary deficit.
To put it simply, if that number is positive, it means you're already spending more money than you're bringing in before you even pay a single rupee in interest on your past debts. The claim is that this data would prove that new loans are being taken just to service old ones.
Okay, so we've waded through a lot of financial terms and technical questions, but what does any of this actually mean for the average person living in Meghalaya? At the end of the day, who really ends up paying the price for all this debt? This is where it gets really personal. The author demands to know the exact per capita debt. That's the total state debt divided by the entire population. They want that number to make it crystal clear that this isn't some abstract government problem. No, this is a real financial burden that, they argue, is being placed on the shoulders of every single citizen, including a child who's just being born today.
And you don't get a bill in the mail for this debt. The argument is that you feel it in other ways. It trickles down into things like higher taxes on gas, more expensive electricity bills, and a slow, steady decline in the quality of public services as more and more of the budget gets eaten up by interest payments. It affects everyone, from the miner to the teacher to the shopkeeper. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most challenging question of all. It's not just asking for a new law to limit debt. It's asking for a law with real teeth, one that would actually make it a criminal offense to break that limit and hold officials personally responsible. It's a really provocative idea, and it leaves us all with a pretty critical question to think about. Where do we draw the line between financial policy and personal accountability?